There are families in America whose names appear on buildings, universities, hospitals, and foundations across the country. Names that conjure images of opulent mansions, private railroads, and fortunes so vast they reshape the nation's economy. These families built empires during an era called the Gilded Age, a time when industrial titans accumulated wealth that would make modern billionaires look modest by comparison. And here's what most people don't realize: these dynasties never really went away. They simply transformed. When John D. Rockefeller died in 1937, he left behind a fortune that, when adjusted for the size of the American economy at the time, would be worth over $140 billion today. Cornelius Vanderbilt controlled more than 1/6 of America's rail lines. Andrew Carnegie's steel empire produced nearly half of all steel in the United States. J.P. Morgan wielded so much financial power that he personally bailed out the United States government. Not once but twice. And the DuPont family controlled an explosives monopoly so complete that at one point, they supplied 90% of America's gunpowder. These weren't just wealthy businessmen. They were architects of the modern American economy, men who created the corporate structures, banking systems, and industrial frameworks that still define how business operates today. And through trusts, foundations, and strategic transformations, their influence endures. Today, we're diving deep into 5 dynasties who built America during the Gilded Age, and who, in ways both visible and hidden, still shape the nation's power structures. This is the story of how empires are built, how they evolve, and how they maintain power across generations. Let's begin. The Rockefellers. From oil monopoly to institutional power, the year is 1863. A 24-year-old commission merchant in Cleveland, Ohio, makes a decision that will change American history. His name is John Davison Rockefeller, and he's about to enter the oil refining business. The timing couldn't be more perfect. The Civil War is raging, creating massive demand for kerosene to light military camps and homes. Oil has recently been discovered in western Pennsylvania, and the rush is on. But Rockefeller sees something others don't. While prospectors are racing to drill more wells, he recognizes that the real money isn't in extracting oil from the ground, it's in refining it. By 1870, he establishes the Standard Oil Company of Ohio with his brother William Henry Flagler and several other partners. His vision from the start is crystalline: dominate the refining industry through ruthless efficiency and strategic consolidation. What happens next is one of the most extraordinary examples of business empire building in history. Rockefeller doesn't just compete, he eliminates competition. His strategy is methodical. First, he achieves unprecedented economies of scale by building the largest and most efficient refineries in the world. Standard Oil produces kerosene cheaper than anyone else. Then comes the masterstroke: the rebates. Rockefeller negotiates secret deals with railroad companies. Standard Oil ships so much product that railroads give him substantial discounts on shipping costs, rebates that his competitors don't receive, but it gets even more aggressive. In some agreements, Rockefeller receives rebates not just on his own shipments, but on his competitors' shipments as well. Every time a rival oil company ships product on certain railroads, a portion of that shipping fee flows back to Rockefeller. It's economic warfare, and it's devastatingly effective. When competitors refuse to sell, Rockefeller has other methods. He'll slash prices in their local markets to unsustainable levels, operating at a loss that Standard Oil's massive capital reserves can absorb but smaller companies cannot. Once the competitor is sufficiently weakened, Rockefeller makes an offer: sell now for a reasonable price, or face bankruptcy and get nothing. Within the first 3 months of 1872 alone, Rockefeller bought out, shut down, or bankrupted 22 of his 26 Cleveland competitors. By 1880, Standard Oil controlled roughly 90% of oil refining in the United States. But there's a problem, legal one. In the 19th century, corporations can't easily operate across state lines or own stock in other corporations. So in 1882, Rockefeller's lawyers devised something revolutionary: the trust. The Standard Oil Trust Agreement creates a board of 9 trustees, including Rockefeller, who holds stock in approximately 40 separate companies. These companies remain nominally independent, but the trustees control them all, creating a unified, coordinated empire that's virtually immune to investigation. The trust structure is so effective that other industries immediately copy it. Sugar trusts, steel trusts, tobacco trusts. The word trust becomes synonymous with monopolistic control, and the public backlash grows intense. Journalist Ida Tarbell, whose father lost his oil business to Standard Oil's practices, writes a devastating 19-part expose in McClure's magazine starting in 1902. Her investigation reveals the ruthless tactics, the secret rebates, the predatory pricing, all laid bare for the American public. The government finally acts. In 1906, President Theodore Roosevelt's administration files suit under the Sherman Antitrust Act. The case drags on for years. But in 1911, the Supreme Court delivers its verdict. Standard Oil must be broken up. The trust is dissolved into 34 separate companies. This should be the end of the Rockefeller empire. Instead, it's a transformation. Those 34 companies include what will become Exxon, Mobil, Chevron, Amoco, and Conoco. John D. Rockefeller owns stock in all of them. As these companies grow over the 20th century, his fortune doesn't shrink, it explodes. The breakup that was supposed to destroy his empire makes him even richer. By the time of his death in 1937, Rockefeller is worth approximately $1.4 billion, an almost incomprehensible sum representing roughly 1.5% of the entire U.S. economy. But here's where the story gets really interesting: the pivot to institutional power. Starting in the early 1900s, even before the Standard Oil breakup, Rockefeller begins systematically giving away his fortune to create something more enduring than wealth: influence over American institutions. In 1913, the Rockefeller Foundation is established with a simple but sweeping mission: to promote the well-being of mankind throughout the world. The foundation becomes one of the most influential philanthropic institutions in history. It shapes public health policy, funding the International Health Division that becomes the model for the World Health Organization. It revolutionizes medical education, supporting medical schools across America and establishing the China Medical Board, which builds what's essentially a Johns Hopkins for China. The Rockefeller Foundation doesn't just give money, it shapes entire fields. It pioneers the Green Revolution in agriculture, dramatically increasing crop yields in Asia and Africa. It funds scientific research that leads to the development of vaccines, including the yellow fever vaccine. The National Science Foundation and National Institutes of Health are both modeled on Rockefeller-funded programs. The Foundation's principles, emphasizing top-down agenda setting, budget incentives, and narrow, efficient interventions, become the template for international development work. But influence extends beyond health. The Rockefeller family funds the University of Chicago, transforming it into one of the world's premier research universities. They build Rockefeller University, dedicated to biomedical research. They finance Colonial Williamsburg's restoration. They were instrumental in creating the United Nations headquarters in New York through a donation of the land. Through carefully selected grants to think tanks, policy organizations, and research institutions, the Rockefeller Foundation influences policy debates on everything from agriculture to education to foreign affairs. By the 21st century, direct Rockefeller control of the oil industry is long gone. Those companies have merged and evolved beyond family ownership. But the institutional infrastructure the Rockefellers built, the foundations, the universities, the research centers, the policy networks, remains. The family's net worth is estimated around $10 billion, dispersed among numerous descendants. More importantly, their philanthropic empire controls assets exceeding $6 billion and maintains relationships with countless institutions they've supported over more than a century. This is the Rockefeller blueprint: transform industrial wealth into institutional influence. Control not companies but the organizations that shape how Americans think about health, education, science, and policy. It's power that doesn't appear on any wealth ranking, but it shapes the foundations of American society. Carnegie and Morgan, steel, finance, and the architecture of corporate America. If Rockefeller perfected the monopoly, Andrew Carnegie perfected vertical integration, and J.P. Morgan perfected the art of consolidation. Together, they created the corporate structures that define modern capitalism. Andrew Carnegie's story begins with poverty. Born in 1835 in Dunfermline, Scotland, his family arrives in America in 1848 when Andrew is just 13. They settle in Allegheny, Pennsylvania, essentially penniless. Young Andrew takes a job in a cotton mill, earning $1.20 per week. It's about as far from industrial titan as you can imagine. But Carnegie has two things working for him: an extraordinary work ethic and an ability to recognize opportunity. He moves to the Ohio Telegraph Company, becomes a telegraph operator, and catches the attention of Thomas A. Scott of the Pennsylvania Railroad. Scott becomes Carnegie's mentor, teaching him about business, railroads, and investment. By 1859, at 24 years old, Carnegie is managing the Western Division of the Pennsylvania Railroad and earning $1,500 a year, a middle-class salary. During the Civil War, Carnegie helps Scott organize military transportation for the Union Army. More importantly, he starts investing. In 1864, he invests in oil wells in northwestern Pennsylvania and makes a fortune, pulling in over $1 million in cash dividends. This gives him the capital to pursue his real ambition: steel. The timing is crucial. In the 1860s and 70s, America is transforming. Railroads are expanding rapidly, requiring thousands of miles of steel rail. Cities are growing upward, demanding steel for skyscrapers. The Navy is modernizing with steel ships. Steel demand is exploding, but the industry is fragmented and inefficient. Carnegie enters steel production methodically. He adopts the Bessemer process, which allows steel to be produced cheaply and efficiently. But his real innovation is vertical integration. Carnegie doesn't just build steel mills. He buys iron ore mines to control his raw materials. He purchases coke ovens to make the fuel needed for steel production. He acquires railroads and steamship lines to transport materials. He owns everything from the source to the customer, eliminating middlemen and slashing costs at every step. His obsession with efficiency becomes legendary. There is a story about Carnegie walking through one of his plants and noticing that workers seal kerosene cans with 40 drops of solder. He asks a foreman to try 38 drops. Some cans leak. He tells them to try 39. They don't leak. 39 drops becomes the new standard, and across millions of cans, this tiny change saves a fortune. Carnegie runs his mills brutally efficiently. Workers labor 12-hour shifts, 7 days a week. Safety standards are minimal. Labor conditions are harsh. When workers at the Homestead Steel Works try to unionize in 1892, Carnegie's general manager Henry Clay Frick locks them out and brings in Pinkerton detectives. The resulting battle kills 3 Pinkertons and 7 Union members. The strike is crushed, and unions are effectively eliminated from Carnegie's operations for decades. But the efficiency pays off economically. By 1890, Carnegie Steel is producing more steel than all of Great Britain. The company is a colossus, the largest and most profitable steel producer in the world. And Carnegie, despite his harsh treatment of workers, begins publicly promoting a philosophy he calls the gospel of wealth. In an 1889 essay, he argues that the wealthy have a moral obligation to use their fortunes to improve society. Individual workers shouldn't get higher wages, he argues, because they'll waste the money. But if the rich administer wealth wisely through philanthropy, they can uplift society as trustees of the poor. Then comes 1901 and the entrance of J.P. Morgan into the story. John Pierpont Morgan is the opposite of Carnegie in almost every way. While Carnegie is a self-made man who clawed his way from poverty, Morgan is born into wealth in 1837. His father is an international banker. His grandfather helped found Aetna Insurance. Morgan attends prestigious schools in Boston and Germany, speaks multiple languages fluently, and enters banking with every advantage. But Morgan has vision. By the 1890s, he's transformed American finance. His bank, J.P. Morgan and Company, reorganizes failing railroads, consolidates competing companies, and finances massive industrial projects. Morgan believes that competition is wasteful and destructive. His philosophy is Morganization. Buy competing firms, merge them into massive, efficient corporations, seat Morgan representatives on the board, and eliminate the chaos of competition. In 1901, Morgan is the most powerful banker in America. He's consolidated railroads, created General Electric by merging Edison General Electric and Thomson Houston Electric Company, and he's looking at the steel industry. The industry is fragmented with dozens of companies, including Carnegie Steel. Morgan sees an opportunity to create unprecedented consolidation. Carnegie is 65 and considering retirement. Morgan approaches him about selling. Carnegie is initially reluctant, but Morgan is persistent. Finally, Carnegie names his price: $480 million. It's an astronomical sum, roughly equivalent to $18.5 billion in purchasing power today. Morgan agrees without hesitation. Within months, Morgan combines Carnegie Steel with Federal Steel Company and 7 other steel firms to create the United States Steel. Corporation. Use Steel is capitalized at $1.4 billion, the first billion-dollar corporation in history. It controls nearly 70% of America's steel production. The scale is unprecedented. But Morgan's influence extends far beyond steel. He controls approximately 1/6 of America's railroad mileage. He holds controlling interests in Aetna Insurance, Western Union, Pullman Car Company, and dozens of other corporations. When financial panics strike in 1893 and 1907, threatening to collapse the entire American banking system, Morgan organizes rescue efforts. In 1895, he arranges a gold purchase to prevent the U.S. Treasury from going bankrupt. In the Panic of 1907, he personally convinces other bankers to commit millions to shore up failing institutions, preventing economic collapse. Morgan wields power that no private citizen should possess in a democracy. In 1912, Congress investigates through the Pujo Committee, examining whether a money trust controls American finance. The committee concludes that Morgan and a small group of financiers control an aggregate of $22 billion in resources, equivalent to the value of all property in the 22 states west of the Mississippi River. Morgan testifies, essentially confirming his enormous power, but dies the following year before any reforms can touch him. The legacy of Carnegie and Morgan isn't just in the companies they built, though U.S. Steel remains a significant corporation today. It's in the structures they pioneered. Vertical integration, consolidation, the corporation as organizational form. These are the Carnegie-Morgan inheritance. More than that, Carnegie's philanthropic model, giving away vast wealth to libraries, universities, and cultural institutions, becomes the template for wealthy Americans. Carnegie gives away over $350 million, building 2,509 libraries worldwide, establishing Carnegie Mellon University, funding Carnegie Hall, and supporting countless other institutions. J.P. Morgan Chase, the bank that bears Morgan's name, is currently the largest bank in the United States with assets exceeding $3 trillion. The institution Morgan built has evolved, but it remains a pillar of American finance, a direct descendant of the empire he consolidated during the Gilded Age. The Vanderbilts. Transportation empire to social dynasty. The Vanderbilt story starts on Staten Island in 1794 with a boy who will quit school at age 11. His name is Cornelius Vanderbilt, and he'll die the richest man in America. Young Cornelius goes to work on his father's ferry at 11 years old. By 16, he's borrowed $100 from his mother to buy his own ferryboat. The deal is strict. Before she lend him the money, he has to plow and plant an 8-acre field. He does it in one day. That combination of work ethic and ambition defines his entire career. Vanderbilt starts with small ferry runs around New York Harbor, but he quickly sees bigger opportunities. By the 1820s, he's moved into steamboat operations, running routes between New York and New Jersey. His strategy is simple but effective. Undercut competitors on price while offering better service. He drives rivals out of business, then buys their routes cheap. Competitors start calling him the Commodore, and the nickname sticks. When the California Gold Rush begins in 1849, Vanderbilt pivots brilliantly. Thousands of Americans want to reach California, and the fastest route is by steamship to Panama, cross the isthmus, then another ship to California. Vanderbilt establishes the Accessory Transit Company, creating a faster route through Nicaragua using Lake Nicaragua. His ships dominate the California trade, and gold flowing back east makes him immensely wealthy. But in the 1860s, Vanderbilt sees that the future isn't water, it's railroads. At age 70, when most men are retiring, Vanderbilt makes his boldest move. He sells his entire steamship empire and invests everything in railroads. His first acquisition is the New York and Harlem Railroad in 1863. The railroad is widely considered nearly worthless, but Vanderbilt sees its potential. It's the only railroad line that runs directly into the center of Manhattan, down what's now Park Avenue to 26th Street. In 1867, he acquires the Hudson River Railroad. In 1867, he takes control of the New York Central Railroad. Then he begins the consolidation that makes his fortune legendary. Vanderbilt merges the Harlem, Hudson River, and New York Central into one massive system, the New York Central and Hudson River Railroad. This isn't just a merger of paperwork. He invests millions in improvements, upgrading tracks, replacing iron rails with steel, building the magnificent Grand Central Depot in New York, which later becomes Grand Central Terminal. By 1873, he's extended his rail lines all the way to Chicago. The New York Central becomes a transportation artery crucial to American commerce. It connects the industrial powerhouse of the Midwest with the financial capital of the East Coast. Freight, passengers, goods, everything flows along Vanderbilt's rails. His control is so complete that he can influence commodity prices nationwide. When grain needs to reach New York from Chicago, it goes on Vanderbilt railroads. His rates determine profit margins for farmers, merchants, and industrial suppliers. Vanderbilt's methods are as ruthless as Rockefeller's. He bribes politicians to secure favorable regulations. He manipulates stock prices through information control and strategic timing. When rival investor Jay Gould attempts to take control of the Erie Railroad through stock manipulation, Vanderbilt engages in an epic battle, buying Erie stock aggressively. Gould wins by watering down the stock, issuing new shares faster than Vanderbilt can buy them. Vanderbilt loses over $7 million but learns a valuable lesson. He later says of Gould, "Never kick a skunk." When Vanderbilt dies in 1877 at age 82, his estate is worth over $100 million. Adjusted for the size of the U.S. economy at the time, this represents roughly $143 billion in modern economic terms. He leaves 95% of this fortune to his son William Henry Vanderbilt, believing William is the only one capable of maintaining the empire. Here's where the Vanderbilt story diverges from Rockefeller. Where Rockefeller transforms into institutional influence, the Vanderbilts become a social dynasty. William Henry doubles the family fortune through skilled management of the railroads. But his sons and grandsons begin spending it on something different: opulence. The family builds extraordinary mansions. Cornelius Vanderbilt II constructs the Breakers in Newport, Rhode Island, a 70-room Italian Renaissance palace that's one of America's grandest private homes. William Kissam Vanderbilt builds Marble House, another Newport mansion designed to rival European palaces. On Fifth Avenue in New York, Vanderbilt mansions line entire blocks, each trying to outdo the others in magnificence. George Washington Vanderbilt II, the Commodore's grandson, builds the most ambitious Vanderbilt estate, the Biltmore Estate in Asheville, North Carolina. Completed in 1895, it remains the largest privately owned house in the United States. The chateau-style mansion contains 250 rooms, including 35 bedrooms, 43 bathrooms, and 65 fireplaces. It sits on 8,000 acres of meticulously designed grounds, but this conspicuous consumption comes with a cost. Each generation spends more than it earns. Inheritance taxes chip away at the fortune. By the mid-20th century, the Vanderbilt wealth has fragmented among dozens of descendants. Most of the Fifth Avenue mansions are demolished. The family sells its stake in the railroad empire. By 1973, when 120 descendants gather for the first family reunion, not one of them is a millionaire. The Vanderbilt transformation illustrates a different path, from industrial empire to cultural legacy. The family's real estate developments shaped Manhattan's growth. Grand Central Terminal remains one of New York's most iconic landmarks. The Biltmore Estate is now a major tourist attraction. Vanderbilt University in Nashville, founded with the Commodore's $1 million donation, is a prestigious research institution. The family's architectural patronage influenced American design and urban development. Today, Vanderbilt descendants include journalist Anderson Cooper and various other individuals scattered across professions. The concentrated wealth is gone, but the Vanderbilt name remains synonymous with Gilded Age excess and American aspiration, a symbol of both extraordinary success and the challenges of preserving dynastic wealth across generations. The Astors, real estate empire and social gatekeeping. The Astor story begins not with oil or steel or railroads, but with fur and land, lots of land. Johann Jakob Astor is born in 1763 in Waldorf, Germany, the son of a poor butcher. In 1783, at age 20, he immigrates to America after the Treaty of Paris ends the Revolutionary War. He arrives in New York essentially penniless and takes a job with a fur trader. Within years, he's learned the business and starts his own company. By 1800, he's worth approximately $250,000. equivalent to about $6 million today, a respectable fortune for someone who started with nothing. But Astor's real genius isn't in fur trading, though he builds an empire that extends across the American frontier and into China. His genius is in real estate. As early as the 1790s, Astor starts buying land in Manhattan, then a small city concentrated at the southern tip of the island. He buys vacant lots, undeveloped properties, farmland. Other wealthy New Yorkers see these purchases as foolish. Who needs land that far uptown? But Astor has vision. He understands that New York will grow. The population is expanding, commerce is increasing, and Manhattan is geographically constrained by water. Land will become scarce and valuable, so Astor buys and holds. He purchases 70 acres of Manhattan real estate running from 42nd to 46th streets between Broadway and the Hudson River. He acquires properties across the developing city. Each decade, as New York expands northward, Astor's holdings increase in value. His strategy is remarkably patient. He doesn't develop much of the land himself. Instead, he leases it on long-term ground leases, collecting rent while retaining ownership. As the city grows around his properties, those rents escalate. By the time Astor dies in 1848 at age 84, he's worth approximately $20 million, making him America's first multimillionaire. More importantly, he's created something that will last, a real estate empire. Astor establishes what's believed to be America's first family trust in 1834, containing 125 parcels of valuable real estate covering much of Manhattan's west side. The trust structure protects the wealth across generations and prevents fragmentation. The Astors become known as the landlords of New York. His son, William Backhouse Astor, inherits the empire and expands it aggressively. William builds over 700 stores and residences in New York. He diversifies the family holdings and continues the strategy of buying, holding, and leasing. By the time of his death in 1875, the Astor real estate empire is vast and growing more valuable every year. But the Astor dynasty becomes famous for something beyond wealth: social power. William's wife, Caroline Schermerhorn Astor, transforms into the undisputed queen of Gilded Age society. Known simply as Mrs. Astor, she doesn't just attend high society, she defines it. Together with social arbiter Ward McAllister, Mrs. Astor creates the 400, a list of New York's social elite. The number comes from the capacity of her Fifth Avenue ballroom, supposedly the maximum number who could comfortably fit for her parties. But it's really about exclusion. The 400 represents old money, families whose wealth dates back generations. Families who represent proper society. Mrs. Astor's rules are strict. New money, no matter how vast, doesn't automatically grant entry. You could be worth hundreds of millions, but if your fortune comes from railroads or industry, from work rather than inheritance, you're not automatically acceptable. The Vanderbilts, despite their enormous wealth, are initially excluded. It takes years and an extraordinary ball thrown by Alva Vanderbilt before Mrs. Astor finally sends the Vanderbilts a calling card, acknowledging their social acceptance. Mrs. Astor's power extends beyond guest lists. She dictates fashion, determines which cultural institutions receive support, influences what's considered tasteful or vulgar. She hosts an annual ball every January, always on a Monday night, beginning with dinner at 11 p.m. and dancing until dawn. An invitation to Mrs. Astor's ball is the most coveted ticket in America. Her approval or disapproval can make or break social reputations. The Astor family continues its real estate dominance into the 20th century. They developed the original Waldorf Astoria Hotel, though this comes from a family feud. William Waldorf Astor, angry at family disputes, builds the 13-story Waldorf Hotel in 1893. His cousin, John Jacob Astor IV, retaliates by building an even taller hotel next door. Eventually, the buildings are connected by a marble corridor, creating the famous Waldorf Astoria. John Jacob Astor IV becomes a fascinating character. Beyond his role in the family business, he's an inventor who patents several devices, including a bicycle brake and a turbine engine. He's also an author who writes a science fiction novel. And in 1912, he boards the RMS Titanic with his young, pregnant second wife. When the ship strikes an iceberg and begins sinking, Astor ensures his wife gets into a lifeboat. He doesn't survive. His body is recovered 2 weeks later, identified by the initials sewn into his jacket and his gold pocket watch. At the time of his death, he's one of the wealthiest men in the world. and the richest passenger on Titanic. The Astor fortune, like the Vanderbilt fortune, gradually disperses through the 20th century. Real estate holdings are sold off. The family trust dissolves in 1919 after the death of the last grandchild of the original John Jacob Astor, with over a dozen relatives benefiting financially. Vincent Astor, John Jacob IV's son, sells nearly half of the family's property holdings in the mid-20th century, marking the end of Astor dominance over New York real estate. But the Astor legacy remains embedded in New York's landscape. Astoria, Queens? Astor Place, the St. Regis Hotel, built by John Jacob Astor IV and still standing. Numerous buildings and institutions still carry the Astor name. And in culture, the name remains synonymous with old money, social prestige, and the power to determine who belongs in elite circles. Today, branches of the Astor family persist in both America and Britain. William Waldorf Astor moved to England and became the first Viscount Astor. His descendants include notable figures in British politics and society. The American branch is more dispersed, but the family remains part of historical consciousness, representing the transformation of commercial wealth into social gatekeeping power and the enduring influence of old money in American society. The DuPonts, the chemical dynasty that built Delaware. Our final dynasty is perhaps the least famous to the general public, but arguably the most enduring in terms of concentrated regional power. The DuPont family didn't just build a company. They built an entire state's economy, political structure, and cultural institutions. The story begins in France during the chaos following the French Revolution. Pierre Samuel Dupont de Nemours is a French economist and minor aristocrat. When revolutionary violence escalates, he flees to America in 1800 with his two sons, Victor Marie and Eleuthère Irénée. Pierre Samuel is friends with Thomas Jefferson, and Jefferson encourages the family to establish themselves in the young American Republic. Eleuthère Irénée, the younger son, has specialized training in chemistry and gunpowder manufacturing. He'd studied under the renowned French chemist Antoine Lavoisier. When E.I. DuPont goes hunting shortly after arriving in America, he's appalled by the poor quality of American gunpowder. He sees an opportunity. In 1802, E.I. DuPont establishes a gunpowder mill on the banks of the Brandywine River near Wilmington, Delaware. The location is carefully chosen. The river provides water power to run the mill. Nearby willow trees can be turned into the fine charcoal needed for quality gunpowder. Stone quarries provide building materials. And the Delaware River allows for easy shipment of sulfur and saltpeter, the other ingredients in gunpowder production. The timing is crucial. America is expanding westward. Military conflicts with Native American tribes and foreign powers create constant demand for gunpowder. When the War of 1812 begins, DuPont becomes a major supplier of gunpowder to the United States military. The company nearly goes bankrupt before the war, but military contracts save it and propel its growth. This pattern will repeat. Wars consistently boost DuPont's fortunes. But E.I. DuPont doesn't just sell gunpowder. He obsesses over quality and safety. His mills produce the most consistent, highest quality powder in America. His reputation for reliability makes the DuPont name trusted by both military and commercial customers. And unlike many powder manufacturers of the era, he implements relatively strict safety protocols. When explosions do occur, and they're inevitable in gunpowder manufacturing, DuPont helps survivors and rebuilds quickly. After E.I. DuPont's death in 1834, the company passes through family leadership, each generation expanding operations. By the mid-1800s, DuPont is the largest gunpowder manufacturer in America. During the Civil War, the company supplies between 1/3 and 1/2 of all powder used by the Union Army. The profits are enormous, and they're reinvested into expansion. Lamech DuPont, E.I.'s grandson, becomes particularly important in the late 1800s. He's a chemist who develops cheaper production methods, substituting sodium nitrate for expensive saltpeter. He also recognizes that the future isn't just in gunpowder. In 1880, Lamech founds the Repauno Chemical Company specifically to produce dynamite, understanding that this new explosive will transform mining and railroad construction. When Lamech dies in an accidental factory explosion in 1884, DuPont acquires Repauno and incorporates dynamite production into the company. By 1900, DuPont controls approximately 90% of the explosives market in America. The company has effectively monopolized the industry through acquisitions, superior production, and strategic positioning. When senior family members decide to sell the company in 1902, three younger cousins, Pierre, Alfred, and T. Coleman DuPont, all under 40 pool resources to buy it. They transform the family partnership into a modern corporation, centralizing operations and modernizing management. Then comes World War I, and the DuPont fortune explodes. France, Britain, and eventually America need massive quantities of explosives. DuPont becomes the largest supplier of military explosives to the Allied forces. The profits are astronomical. Between 1915 and 1918, DuPont's revenues increase over 40-fold. By the war's end, the company has accumulated nearly $250 million in profits. Pierre DuPont, now company president, makes a crucial strategic decision: diversify. DuPont uses its war profits to move beyond explosives into chemistry. The company begins producing paints, dyes, plastics, and synthetic materials. In 1917, acquiring technology from a British company, DuPont enters the dyestuff industry, reducing American dependence on European dye production. By the 1920s, DuPont is America's largest chemical company. The company's research labs become innovation centers. DuPont develops nylon, the first fully synthetic fiber, in 1935. This single innovation revolutionizes textiles. DuPont also creates neoprene synthetic rubber, Teflon, Kevlar, and countless other materials that become ubiquitous in modern life. The company transforms from an explosives manufacturer into a chemical giant whose products touch almost every aspect of American industry. But DuPont power extends far beyond the company itself. The family essentially controls Delaware. At the company's peak, DuPont enterprises employ 10% of Delaware's entire population. Family members serve as governors, senators, and in virtually every significant political position in the state. Pierre DuPont personally finances Delaware's public school system, spending $5 million on schools and $2 million on what becomes the University of Delaware. The family funds roads, parks, museums, and cultural institutions across the state. This isn't altruism alone. The DuPonts understand that their business success depends on having a stable, educated workforce and functional infrastructure. By controlling the state's development, they create conditions favorable to their operations. It's enlightened self-interest exercised at a scale few families ever achieve. The DuPont estates scattered across Delaware and Pennsylvania become legendary. Pierre DuPont builds Longwood Gardens, eventually expanding it to encompass over 1,000 acres with elaborate fountain displays and conservatories showcasing thousands of plant species. Alfred I. DuPont constructs Nemours, a 77-room mansion with French-style gardens designed to rival Versailles. Henry Francis DuPont transforms his family estate into Winterthur, which becomes one of America's premier museums of decorative arts, housing nearly 90,000 objects spanning 2 centuries of American craftsmanship. The DuPont family's political influence in Delaware becomes so complete that the state is sometimes called DuPont's pocket borough. When investigating whether corporate consolidation has gone too far, federal authorities struggle to prosecute DuPont because Delaware's entire legal and political establishment has deep ties to the family. DuPont lawyers write Delaware's corporate laws, making the state the most business-friendly jurisdiction in America. This legacy endures. Today, more than 60% of Fortune 500 companies are incorporated in Delaware because of laws that DuPont influence helped shape over a century ago. The company itself continues evolving through the 20th century. During World War II, DuPont manages the massive Manhattan Project facility at Hanford, Washington, which produces plutonium for atomic bombs. After the war, the company continues developing new materials and chemicals. By the late 20th century, DuPont is one of the world's largest chemical companies with operations spanning the globe. However, like all dynasties, the DuPonts face challenges maintaining concentrated power across generations. The company goes public, diluting family control. Various DuPont descendants sell shares. By the 21st century, direct family ownership is minimal. In 2015, DuPont merges with Dow Chemical, creating Dow DuPont, which later splits into 3 separate companies. The original E.I. DuPont de Nemours and Company, after more than 2 centuries, ceases to exist as an independent entity. But the DuPont influence in Delaware remains unmistakable. The family still owns significant property. DuPont descendants continue appearing in Delaware politics and business. The institutions they built, from Longwood Gardens to Venator, to the schools and roads Pierre DuPont funded, remain integral to Delaware's identity. And Delaware's corporate law structure, shaped by over a century of DuPont influence, continues generating revenue for the state and determining how American corporations operate. The DuPont story illustrates yet another path to enduring power: regional dominance. Rather than dispersing across the nation like the Rockefellers or Vanderbilts, the DuPonts concentrated their influence in one state, effectively becoming Delaware's ruling family. They transformed industrial wealth into institutional control at a regional level, creating a legacy that persists even after direct corporate control has faded. The pattern of power: how these dynasties still shape America: 5 families, 5 different industries, 5 different paths, but all sharing common threads that reveal how power perpetuates itself across generations in America. First, the timing. Each of these families built their empires during a specific window in American history when certain conditions aligned. The Gilded Age, roughly from the 1870s to 1900, represented a unique moment. America was industrializing rapidly. New technologies like railroads, steel production, oil refining, and chemical manufacturing were transforming the economy. Regulatory structures were minimal. Antitrust laws didn't exist until 1890, and even then enforcement was weak for decades. Labor protections were virtually non-existent. Corporate forms were evolving, allowing unprecedented concentration of capital. In this environment, ruthless, visionary entrepreneurs could build empires impossible to create today. They could monopolize entire industries, manipulate markets, control politicians, and crush competition with methods that would now be illegal. The Gilded Age was a lawless frontier in business terms, and these families were the conquistadors. Second, the transformation. None of these families maintained power through the original source of their wealth alone. Rockefeller Oil became Rockefeller Philanthropy. Carnegie Steel became Carnegie Libraries and Universities. Morgan Finance evolved into J.P. Morgan Chase. Vanderbilt Railroads dispersed but left architectural and institutional legacies. Astor Real Estate became social gatekeeping. DuPont explosives became chemicals, then institutional control of Delaware. This transformation is crucial. Industrial empires are vulnerable. Technologies change. Markets shift. Governments regulate. But institutional power, the control of foundations, universities, cultural institutions, political structures, and legal frameworks, endures. The smartest dynasties pivoted from making things to shaping systems. Third, the multiplication of influence. These families didn't just create businesses. They built networks. Rockefeller's Standard Oil Trust became the model for corporate consolidation across industries. Morgan's banking practices shaped modern finance. DuPont's control of Delaware created the legal structure under which most American corporations now operate. Carnegie's philanthropy established the template for billionaire giving that continues with Gates, Buffett, and contemporary wealth. The institutional infrastructure these families created, the foundations, the universities, the museums, the think tanks, the policy organizations, these institutions outlive individuals and often outlive direct family control. But they perpetuate certain approaches to wealth, power, and social organization that reflect their founders' visions. Fourth, the intermarriage and social networks. The wealthy families of the Gilded Age didn't just compete, they connected. Rockefellers married into other wealthy families. So did Vanderbilts, Astors, and others. These connections created a web of relationships linking industrial, financial, and social power. The 400 wasn't just a social club. It was a consolidation of America's economic elite into a self-reinforcing aristocracy. Fifth, and perhaps most importantly, the legal and structural innovations. These dynasties pioneered the trust, the corporation, the foundation, and the holding company. They created legal structures that allowed wealth to be preserved across generations despite inheritance taxes and attempts at redistribution. The Astor Family Trust, the Rockefeller Foundation, the DuPont corporate structure. These weren't just business arrangements. They were institutional innovations that changed how wealth and power could be maintained in America. Today, in 2025, these dynasties' direct control has faded. No Rockefeller runs an oil company. No Carnegie manages a steel mill. No Vanderbilt controls railroads. No Astor dominates New York real estate. The DuPonts no longer own their chemical empire. But look closer. The Rockefeller Foundation has assets exceeding $6 billion and influences global health policy, agricultural development, and scientific research. Rockefeller University remains a premier research institution. The University of Chicago, built with Rockefeller money, houses economists who've shaped policy for decades. J.P. Morgan Chase, the institutional descendant of J.P. Morgan's empire, is America's largest bank. Carnegie Mellon University produces cutting-edge research in technology and artificial intelligence. The Carnegie Endowment for International Peace influences foreign policy debates. Carnegie Libraries dot communities across America, still shaping how millions access information. Delaware remains the incorporation destination for most major American corporations because of legal structures the DuPonts influenced. Grand Central Terminal, a Vanderbilt legacy, remains central to New York's transportation system. The social structures the Astors helped establish, the idea of old money gatekeeping and elite networks, persist in private clubs, boards of trustees, and informal power structures. These families transformed from industrial titans to institutional influencers. They built the framework within which modern American capitalism operates. The trust structure they pioneered, though broken up in their specific industries, became the model for modern corporate conglomerates. The philanthropic foundations they established set the template for how wealthy Americans engage with society. The political relationships they cultivated showed how economic power translates into policy influence. The blueprint for modern power, and perhaps most significantly, they established the blueprint for how extreme wealth navigates democratic institutions. In theory, American democracy should prevent aristocracy. In practice, these families showed how wealth can be transformed into forms of power that persist across generations despite democratic constraints. The Gilded Age dynasties proved that in America, direct ownership matters less than institutional influence. You do need to own the oil company if you fund the university that trains the petroleum engineers and the foundation that shapes energy policy. You do need to control the bank if you sit on the boards of the institutions that regulate banking. You do need to own the real estate if you determine who is accepted into the social networks that control access to capital. This is the secret these dynasties discovered. Transform industrial wealth into institutional power, and that power becomes self-perpetuating. It survives market changes, technological disruption, even the dispersal of the original fortune across descendants. The institutions remain, carrying forward the visions, priorities, and power structures their founders established. The transformation wasn't accidental. These families recognized that direct control of industries made them vulnerable to regulation, public backlash, and market forces. But controlling the institutions that shaped education, research, policy, and social access gave them influence that transcended any single company or industry. When Standard Oil was broken up, it should have ended Rockefeller power. Instead, the family had already pivoted to foundations and universities that would shape American society for generations. When the steel industry evolved beyond Carnegie's control, it didn't matter because Carnegie Libraries were educating millions of Americans. Carnegie Hall was defining cultural excellence, and Carnegie Mellon was training the technical workforce of the future. The man who once crushed labor unions through violence became celebrated as the greatest philanthropist of his age, his name synonymous with public good rather than industrial exploitation. Morgan's bank evolved through mergers and transformations, but the corporate structures he pioneered, the concept of financial consolidation, the model of investment banking that he perfected, these became the foundation of modern finance. Whether or not the Morgan family controlled the bank, Morgan's vision shaped how American capitalism functioned. The Vanderbilts lost their railroad empire and spent their fortune on mansions. But Grand Central Terminal remains a monument to their vision, processing 750,000 commuters daily through a space the Vanderbilts created. The Biltmore Estate attracts over 1 million visitors annually, generating economic activity and shaping how Americans understand Gilded Age opulence. The Astors stopped dominating New York real estate, but the social structures they established, the networks of elite families, the gatekeeping mechanisms that determined who had access to power and capital, these patterns persist in country clubs, private schools, and boards of trustees across America. The idea that certain families belong to an upper class with special privileges and responsibilities, that's an Astor legacy. And the DuPonts, despite losing control of their chemical empire, left Delaware with a corporate legal structure that generates hundreds of millions in annual revenue for the state and determines how most major American corporations organize themselves. Every time a Fortune 500 company files paperwork in Delaware, it's using structures the DuPonts helped create. Conclusion: the enduring architecture of American power, the Gilded Age, ended more than a century ago. The robber barons are long dead. Their direct descendants mostly live quietly, their fortunes dispersed across numerous heirs, their names appearing occasionally in society pages but rarely in business headlines. To a casual observer, these dynasties seem like historical curiosities, relics of a bygone era when individual tycoons could dominate entire industries. But that observer would be wrong. The 5 dynasties we've explored, Rockefeller, Carnegie, Morgan, Vanderbilt, Astor, and DuPont, didn't disappear. They transformed. They evolved from industrial empires into institutional infrastructure. They built the frameworks that still shape how American business operates, how wealth concentrates and perpetuates, how power translates across generations despite democratic constraints. Walk through any major American city and you'll see their names. Rockefeller Center in New York, Carnegie Hall, Morgan Library, Vanderbilt University, DuPont Circle in Washington. These aren't just buildings, they're monuments to the transformation of industrial wealth into cultural permanence. They're physical reminders that these families didn't just accumulate money. They shaped the nation's physical landscape, its educational institutions, its cultural life. Look at the boards of trustees of major universities, foundations, museums, and cultural institutions. You'll still find descendants of these families, or representatives of institutions they created, making decisions about education, research priorities, cultural programming, and social initiatives that affect millions of Americans. The Rockefeller Foundation's board determines where billions of dollars flow for global health initiatives. Carnegie Mellon's trustees shape technology education. The Morgan Library's leadership decides which cultural treasures the public can access. Examine the legal structure of American corporations. Most are incorporated in Delaware using laws influenced by DuPont interests over a century of concentrated regional power. This isn't ancient history, it's current practice. Right now, today, corporate lawyers are filing incorporation documents in Delaware because of frameworks the DuPonts helped establish. The state collects over $1 billion annually in franchise taxes, revenue generated by a legal structure a single family shaped through decades of political influence. Study the philanthropic sector and you'll find it still follows models established by Carnegie and Rockefeller, where wealthy individuals create foundations that pursue social goals while maintaining control over how billions of dollars are deployed. The Gates Foundation, the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, the Bezos Earth Fund all follow the Rockefeller template. Convert business fortune into philanthropic institution that pursues the founder's vision for improving society while also providing tax benefits and preserving family influence. The Gilded Age dynasties discovered something crucial. In a democratic society, concentrated ownership is vulnerable, but institutional influence endures. Industries can be regulated, monopolies can be broken up, fortunes can be taxed. The Progressive Era brought reforms specifically designed to break the power of the robber barons. Antitrust laws shattered monopolies. The income tax, introduced in 1913, was meant to redistribute wealth. Inheritance taxes aimed to prevent dynastic accumulation. But universities, foundations, social networks, and legal structures, these persist and perpetuate certain approaches to wealth and power long after the original source of that wealth has dispersed. You can break up Standard Oil, but you can't easily dismantle the Rockefeller Foundation without violating principles of charitable giving and educational freedom. You can tax Carnegie's fortune, but you can't retroactively unbuild the libraries that bear his name and shape how millions access information. These families didn't just get rich. They built the architecture of American capitalism, the trusts, the corporations, the foundations, the social gatekeeping mechanisms. The legal innovations that allow wealth to compound and concentrate across generations, despite periodic democratic pressures for redistribution. They understood that wealth alone is vulnerable, but wealth transformed into institutions becomes nearly permanent, and that architecture remains. It's been renovated, modernized, adapted to new circumstances. Today's tech billionaires create foundations that mirror Rockefeller's model, funding research, shaping policy, pursuing visions of social improvement that reflect their values rather than democratic deliberation. Modern corporations use structures pioneered by Morgan's consolidations, creating holding companies, establishing boards that perpetuate certain governance philosophies, using financial engineering that Morgan would recognize. Delaware incorporation remains the gold standard because of laws shaped by DuPont influence, laws that prioritize management flexibility, and shareholder rights in ways that favor wealth accumulation over labor interests or community impact. The social networks and elite institutions that determine access to power still reflect patterns established when the Astors defined New York society when attending the right schools, joining the right clubs, and knowing the right families opened doors that talent and hard work alone could not. The Gilded Age dynasties may no longer rule directly, but they designed the systems through which power operates in America. They transformed from visible emperors into invisible architects. And in many ways, that makes their influence more enduring, not less. An emperor can be overthrown. Architecture is much harder to change. Understanding this history matters because it reveals patterns that continue today. As new fortunes are created in technology, finance, and other sectors, we're watching similar transformations. Today's billionaires are creating foundations, funding universities, influencing policy, and building institutional power that may persist long after their specific companies become obsolete. Jeff Bezos funds climate initiatives and owns media companies. Elon Musk shapes space exploration policy and communication infrastructure. Mark Zuckerberg's foundation influences education policy and disease research. These modern tycoons aren't just copying the Gilded Age playbook, they're extending it. They're creating institutional power in new domains, from artificial intelligence research to space exploration to biotechnology, areas that will shape humanity's future. And they're redoing it using structures the Gilded Age families pioneered, foundations that allow private visions to be pursued with public money through tax deductions, boards of trustees that perpetuate founder visions long after founders are gone, institutional networks that translate economic power into policy influence. The question isn't whether dynasties can maintain power in America. The Gilded Age families proved they can. The question is whether democratic institutions can evolve to ensure that concentrated economic power doesn't translate into permanent institutional dominance that undermines democratic governance itself. That's a question Americans are still grappling with, more than a century after the original robber barons built their empires. Should billionaires determine education policy through foundation grants? Should private wealth shape health research priorities? Should a small number of families influence which art the public sees, which history is preserved, which scientific questions get asked? Should corporate law be written in a jurisdiction where a single family exercised dominant political influence for generations? These aren't abstract questions. They're about the fundamental nature of power in a democracy. And they're questions these 5 dynasties would recognize, because they spent their lives answering them in their own favor, building structures that would preserve their influence long after they were gone. They understood that democracy threatens concentrated power unless that power transforms from something visible and vulnerable into something institutional and enduring. The Gilded Age dynasties succeeded in that transformation. Their industrial empires are gone, but their institutional power remains, woven into the fabric of how America operates. They proved that in America, the question isn't whether aristocracy can exist. It's whether aristocracy can be recognized when it doesn't look like European nobility but like foundations, universities, and legal structures that shape opportunity and influence across generations. Walk through America today, and you're walking through the world these 5 families helped build. The institutions they created, the structures they pioneered, the transformations they achieved, these remain fundamental to how power works in American society. Understanding their story isn't just about history. It's about understanding how power perpetuates itself in the present, and how it might evolve in the future. If you found this deep dive into the dynasties that shaped America fascinating, hit that like button and subscribe to Market Memories. We explore the hidden patterns in financial history, the stories of wealth and power that continue shaping our world today. Because understanding how empires were built is the first step to understanding how power really works. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.